while we let the slideshow continue to play through, maybe for just a few more slides so that, people can continue to look at that and we can have more people join. I wanted to thank everybody for being with us this morning. Beautiful weekend in May, and I know that, everybody's probably been on their screens quite a bit over the course of the week, but we're so glad that you're able to be with us, albeit just virtually this morning. So thanks for joining us. And one thing that I was hoping that everybody who is on right now could do, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, you can see that there's both the Q&A option and the chat. Both of those are available for today's webinar. And I think, it'd be great if one thing we could do to start off with would be, if you could put in the chat where you're joining us from. If you're joining us from Washington, D.C., let us know what neighborhood you're joining us from. But anywhere you're joining us from in the world, please let us know in the chat. And then in the Q&A, if you can tell us one thing that you're hoping to learn or get out of today's program. As I said, you'll be able to continue to use the chat throughout the program. And then when we get to the Q&A portion of the program towards the end, I'll reiterate this at that point. If you could try to keep your questions for the panel in the Q&A, that would help us keep those organized. But you can continue to use the chat throughout the program as well. It's so great to be able to see where everybody's from. All right. And my name is Jasper Collier. I'm the Oral History Project Manager for the DC Oral History Collaborative and Humanities DC. Just to talk a little bit about the collaborative at the outset here. The goal of the DC Oral History Collaborative, which is the citywide oral history program for Washington, D.C., is to empower DC residents to honor, document, share, and preserve the untold stories of the city. There are a few kind of key ways that the collaborative has done this over its past 5 years of existence. One way is through our grants program. The DC Oral History Collaborative offers supported grants to individuals and organizations throughout the district who want to do oral history projects with their communities. We have training programs, so free public training programs that happen periodically throughout the year. We've trained, I believe, through our 3-session workshop, over 160 residents in DC on the best practices and approaches for oral history. We also have a survey document that was created in the first 2 years of the project that has documented many of the archives holding Washington, D.C. related oral histories throughout the city. And I should also say that the project is a partnership between Humanities DC and the DC Public Library. And all of the oral histories that are collected through the grants program are submitted to the DC Public Library so that they can be documented, preserved, and displayed on the DC Public Library's Dig DC online catalog. Also like to say, thanks to a lot of the people who have helped create and shape the DC Oral History Collaborative, including oral historians Dr. Anna Kaplan and Maggie Lemire, the archivists at the DC Public Library and the DCPL team, including Carrie Cotton Williams, Laura Farley, Linnea Hagerty, and Lisa Warwick. I'd also like to say thank you to my colleague Tracy Mullery, who's working in the background right now to make sure that this program runs smoothly and that we can hear all of your great questions when that period comes up. You can see and hear the panelists and the audio cues for some of the clips that we'll be showing later too. So thanks to Tracy for that. I'd also like to say thank you to our wonderful ASL interpreters, both Rhonda and Billy, who are here with us today to provide extra accessibility to the program as well. So thank you all so much for that. The DC Oral History Collaborative Coffee Chat, which is what this program is, it's the second time that we've done it, is a monthly virtual program featuring teams, interviewers, and narrators who are working on projects supported by DCOHC. And the goal for the program is to share the work of project teams back with the public and with their communities, and also to inspire other people who hopefully are with us on the program today to record oral histories with their families and their neighbors and their communities. So this morning, we'll be joined by the project team from the uniquely titled "The Day Arthur Ashe and Robert Kennedy Played Tennis on Our Block." An incredible project, and I'm really looking forward to turning things over to the panel so they can tell you all about it. The team's going to share a brief presentation of their work, then we'll have a moderated discussion, and then finally at the end, we'll open things up for Q&A. But I'll start off by introducing the panel. We'll start with Janet Stevens, who's a first-generation Washingtonian and second-generation Block resident. She oversees the project photography and acts as a liaison with the project or prospective narrators and community partners. Bintou Kouyate is a second-generation Washingtonian and third-generation Block resident, and she serves as an interviewer and works on transcribing and indexing for the project. Lasaunia Thompson is a second-generation Washingtonian and third-generation Block resident, and she serves as an interviewer and is responsible for the administrative coordination and scheduling of interviews, collecting release forms, metadata entry, and logistic planning of all the public gathering. And then finally, last but not least, is Akua Kouyate Tate, a first-generation Washingtonian and second-generation Block resident. Akua is the project director and bookkeeper, and she works on transcripts and indexes. And I should also say that although I believe Akua was not yet interviewed for this project, if you look in the Dig DC archive, you will find an interview with Akua as a part of the Dance Africa Oral History Project. She's been a promoter, performer, and teacher of African dance styles in Washington, D.C. for decades. So as you're browsing through the Dig DC collection, definitely take a look at Akua's excellent oral history as part of that Dance Africa DC project. And so with that, I would like to also wish happy birthday to Akua. We're lucky to have her here on her birthday, which is great. And then I'll actually turn things over to her to start that presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the birthday greetings. I really appreciate that too. I'll start off a little bit just talking about the project and what it's all about. The title of the project, we hope it was catchy for you, "The Day Arthur Ashe and Robert Kennedy Played Tennis on Our Block." And I have to say, it kind of came to fruition because I read about the Oral History Project, thought it was a really great idea. And I realized that I was thinking, I think it may have been talking to some of my family or friends and how during the COVID time, we hadn't gotten together the way we usually do. And very significant is that there are times when various members of our community would come together over the years. And we're talking about, okay, I'm going to tell my age. I'm 64 years old. I love it. But these are people who I've known all of my life. And we still connect with each other, and it's generational. The fact that it's not just me, but it was our parents, it was our children, grandchildren, etc. And then once in a while when we get together, we would start to get nostalgic about all of the things that happened on the block. And one of my daughters said, "What's the block?" I said, "The block." And so that's how we identify where we live, the block. And I realized that there's so much that's happening around Washington, D.C., and it's very easy for folks not to realize the contributions of communities across Washington, D.C., who've been here for generations. And so then the idea was, okay, how do we decide what we're going to do and how are we going to go after this? And of course, if you have that many years together, that's a long story. So let's pick something that was just a moment in time that would help capture at one point when many of us were on the block. And so as a result of that, that particular event just stood out in my mind, the day that Arthur Ashe and Robert Kennedy played tennis on our block. And that was one of those events that it happened actually in 1967. There were a cross section of people who you know, hundreds of people. As a kid, I was a little child. I was a 10-year-old, but it seemed like thousands to me. And there were so many people there. But as an adult reflecting on this, I recognize, you know something, it didn't just happen. It had to happen because of some level of coordination and organization from the people who lived on the block, even though they weren't the ones who were actually presenting it. But things like, I know that the electricity was plugged into our house, you know. I know that down at Miss Towson's house, someone changed clothes in their house. I know that someone changed clothes in someone else's house. That doesn't just happen with people coming out. And so I said, let's talk a little bit about, let's set this as a point in time to understand about our community, not simply that event, but about the community we grew up in, the community that has really transcended to now more than 6 decades, some even 7 decades, and more than 6 generations, at least 6 generations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I thought one of the ways that we can pop off in terms of just having a conversation amongst us is to talk to the team members. You were introduced to all of them and kind of ask, you know, what was some of the big takeaways or a highlight in being a part of this project? And since this is my daughter sitting next to me, I'll first start it, and then we'll go to Janet, and then we'll go to Lasaunia.
Greetings all, I am Bintou Kouyate. I am a 3rd generation of North Carolina Avenue. One of my greatest highlights is that I heard stories that I had never heard before. And pride, especially since today is the day that Glessie Mae Godwin Johnson gave birth to my mother. There were a lot of stories that actually ended up connecting with my grandmother and how she was very active in her role on North Carolina Avenue and with the block. And I thought that it would be pertinent for my children and my nieces and nephews and their children to hear these stories and these histories of ours. And as we continue realizing that this is DC history, these are the things that our students should have access to, the projects that DC Oral History is doing, the projects that DC Libraries is preserving. These are things that our students as Washingtonians should be able to have some time to take in and study and have pride in their city.
Great. So I want to pass it over to Janet. Janet, what is something that really came out for you being a part of the project?
Come off of mute.
You're on mute, Janet. Come off of mute.
Good morning. Sorry about that. For me, I guess it was a chance to reflect back of all the things that we've been through on the block. When Arthur Ashe came to our block and Robert Kennedy, it was a very exciting day. I was only 9. So it's funny that when you go and you talk to others during that time, the difference in age, what everybody took away different from that. Me being a kid, of course, I was excited. I just knew something big was happening on the block. It was like a block party, and others saw different prospects of the whole day. For me, like I said, it was an exciting day. It was a day just experiencing famous people on the block. And it just took me back down memory lane, just going through this and talking to people on the block that I grew up with that were older than me, some that were younger than me. And it was just a good time hearing those reflections from back then.
Lasaunia, how about you?
So, good morning, everybody. First, let me say thanks to DC, to Humanities DC for allowing us to bring our project to life. So for me, I would say my number one takeaway is learning more about my grandparents. Everybody had something to say about them. Particularly, I hear people tell me all the time, I look like my grandma, I act like my grandma. And it was solidified when I went through the interviews and people saying the things that she did. And now it makes sense to me why I do what I do. But also being able to just get the history, like Bintou, there were stories I heard through the interviews I had never heard before. I didn't even know existed. The connection seemed more real. It made me understand that now I understand why we stay connected. Now I know why we are as close as we are because it was happening way before us. So it just became a domino effect. And even the history that I learned about Robert Kennedy, and I had heard that story before, but not all the details. I didn't realize that they were plugging electricity in our house. So, and for us to still have the same house on the block is just phenomenal. But I will also say that my other takeaway is the camaraderie that we have with each other still today, from generation to generation. And being able to take my mom's generation and can call and hang out with them and take my own generation and we all come together. And it's just a great feeling and a great situation. So again, thank you all for giving us this platform to share our story.
And I will say, just for others to know that this project is still going on. We were fortunate to receive an extension because one of the things that happened is as we were starting to talk to some of the people who are current and former who were part of this long legacy, if you would, of people, families who lived in this community, they started to say, oh, you have to talk to this person. You have to talk to this person. And of course, as you imagine, in COVID times, we had to kind of put a delay on how we could connect. But at the same time, one of the things that came out really clear for us is this true intergenerational relationship that we have. And we could see that, as Janet said, even in talking with people who were 10 years older than us or 5 years older than us or our age. And then you have the next generation of those coming under us. So there's a few more generations between Lasaunia and Bintou. And then of course, my grandchildren. It was so much that, and as we reflected on this, it's like, okay, we have to continue this. We've been asked to bring people together, but more importantly, we also want to make sure that the community where we are realizes the legacy that's been made in this community that literally goes back to the 1940s with many African-American families who have really done so much, not only in this community, but also over throughout Washington, D.C. and nationally, for that matter. But it's a true legacy that we hope that is recorded in DC history. And so now, Jasper, I think that we could probably start with some of the questions or however this format, I have a format in front of me, but I'm not remembering it.
Sure. And one thing that I would ask about that, Akua, is, before we get to the questions, I was wondering if you wanted us to queue up some of the interview excerpts. We can start with that, or we can go back to it, or if there's a point kind of throughout the moderated discussion where you want to come back to one of those clips, we could do it that way if you prefer.
So I'll start with just one clip because as Janet alluded, that we all were different ages at that time. And if you look at clip one, and also just going through some of the documents we were looking at, that you really didn't get a sense about the people on the block. You knew about the two important foes, Robert Kennedy and Arthur Ashe, and that was important, but you really didn't hear much about the block itself or the people or the community. And if you listen to this first clip, this is a wonderful clip that we have from Dr. Vida Cook Olson. who has been on the block longer than me. She's really great, but she's also a educator and an amazing woman who shared some things about that experience. So if you are ready to show that, share that first clip, cue, that would be the one to share right now.
Okay, Tracy, is that ready to go? Awesome.
So the block is now considered Capitol Hill. How do you think about the block from the 1960s, 70s until now?
Well, I had an experience. Well, let me tell you, I had an experience as I was a young adult, and I happened to come upon a Life magazine, which is an old magazine. And in there, they recaptured the author Ashe. It was the story about Arthur Ashe and Robert Kennedy coming to the ghetto. They said, and demonstrating a tennis match to the poor children. And that just shocked me so much because I didn't think I lived in the ghetto and I didn't think I was poor. See, at that point, you thought, well, you have a mother and a father and you live in a house, and you go to church, you had a car. We even had color TV. We were one of the first families that had a color TV. One of the first families that had a TV and then had a color TV, you understand? So I didn't necessarily perceive myself as poor. But I remember reading that article and thinking, God, they referred to that event where Robert Kennedy and Arthur Ashe came to the ghetto to show poor Black children how to play tennis.
Thank you for sharing that. Again, realizing that there's a place that in history has no knowledge about a community and the makeup of the community and the role of that community or how it was. We were a truly very mixed community with lots of working families doing lots of important things for our families and our children and grandchildren. Our parents are doing lots for us. And yet that perception is in history, which is a false perception.
Yes.
Not to say that, there were different economic classes or economics for different people in terms of salaries of home or what they earned. But the reality is what we experienced was not what that Life magazine wrote,
Yes,
projected about us. So it was really, really great to have Dr. Olson's point of view shared in this moment. And there are other important point of views that were shared throughout the interviews that we did with the various narrators.
Thank you for picking that clip out, especially as one to share first, because I think it really demonstrates, as you say, how oral history has this ability to, kind of challenge what exists in archives, to, change perceptions about things that really, as people are doing doing historical research, using, written archives, how, actually getting stories from people who were there, people who lived it, is able to kind of challenge some of those prevailing narratives. So I think that, it kind of really sets up the idea of, what oral history can do and what it can do, especially for community history. So at any point, that we kind of go through this, I know that we have a few more clips that you all have curated for us. We can kind of cue those up, but I just wanted to, start by asking a few questions as well. I think it's really, great to kind of hear what everybody's major takeaway from the project was and everything like that. And it's, great to hear kind of like what your thinking was, Akua, when you were like initially thinking about, why it would be important to put this project together. But, I'm wondering, eventually you all like had to go out and you had to kind of come together as a team and you had to find people who wanted to be involved and everything like that. And I think, especially for the purposes of other people who might be with us who are thinking about starting their own projects, how did that process happen? How did you go out and kind of realize, or encourage other people to like be part of this, really great project, and to kind of go on this, what is now a multi-year journey with you.
Ask Janet to respond a little bit to that, because I got to tell you, she is the most networked person in our team. So she knows everybody and has connection with everybody. So Janet, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it was a matter of just calling around to friends that we connected to since being on the block. And we've always had this connection since day one. People that I grew up with since my mother had me, my neighbors, and all I had to do is reach out to one neighbor and got phone numbers from this person and that person. And we all stay connected anyway. But it was just a matter of calling people, and they were really excited to do this, to let people know about our block. Long time ago, we used to we used to call our neighborhood the block that had all the shady trees that would just flow over it like an arch, and you would come down, and it was just so exciting. In fact, it reminds me of Savannah, Georgia, when you go there, how a lot of the trees overlap and connect like an arch. And I mean, it was just a shady trees that just, the whole block was just shady. And it was a beautiful block. So when I heard Vita's comment, it was so funny because I was only 9, but her reading that, because she's probably maybe 10 to 12 years older than me. And just the difference in, I didn't get a chance to read that. And hearing her say that, I was like, wow, our block was the ghetto? I mean, we had parties. We went on trips. I mean, Sheila's mom, Miss Montglassy, she would take us to Hershey Park, Sandy Point Beach, and we did everything. I mean, we went to Canada. So I couldn't understand when she said the ghetto, the magazine said the ghetto. Well, we did a lot of exciting things for the ghetto, for people who shouldn't have, I guess we didn't have any money, so-called being in the ghetto, but we experienced a lot of things on our block. I mean, we would go to different protests. We would walk to the monument probably every weekend and go up the steps, right, Sheila? We would run up the steps. Don't try running now. Don't try walking down. But we enjoyed ourselves on the block. So it was a good experience just doing this whole piece.
Yeah, and I also want to say that one of the things that was really important is that if we didn't have direct contact with someone because of that network, we could ask someone else to ask someone. So that literally, I remember one of our interviewees, one of our narrators, who we will hear from later on, the reason why we were able to connect is because his sister was best friends with my older sister. And I literally got my older sister on the phone to be that conduit, that liaison to make these connections. And that's still consistent with how we were raised, because I'm younger. So I'm not going to this person straight out. I'm going to go through my older sister. She's going to make that connection and going to open the door for me. And so again, understanding how that family traditions, that culture of a community continues to exist is how we were able to be connected to so many people and make it possible to do this project.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that definitely, kind of illustrates that, some of the best oral history work, some of the best oral history projects are these kind of community conceived projects where, you have a strong understanding of the culture and kind of the way things work in the neighborhood and the community. And that can bring so much to the project in terms of, kind of finding prospective narrators and, making sure that you really get a lot of, buy-in, trust, and rapport from, everyone who you want to be a part of the project. But I want to actually go back to you really quickly, Janet, if you don't mind, and just ask you about the experience of being interviewed. In particular, did you have any apprehension, about, the interview experience and, being asked questions or to share your story? And you might not have, but if you did, what might have helped you to feel a little bit more comfortable sharing those stories?
Yes, I did. And mainly because I'm a person that's behind the camera, or I've always taken pictures since I knew I wanted to be a photographer at age 2. And I always just was behind the camera. So for them to ask me to get in front of a microphone and share my story, it was like, ooh, I don't like that. So, but through much thought, I decided to go ahead and participate as being one of the narrators of this project. And it
Did good.
it it made me talk more than I usually talk, but it was a way of telling my own story in my own time in that moment. So, and giving a different take, like I said, being a 9-year-old and seeing something different opposed to the people that were 17 and 15 who saw it totally different from what I saw. Um, it was just excitement day. It was very exciting just seeing 2 famous people on the block, and that's all I do. It was just a good time.
Great. Thanks, Janet. Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. I'm probably not somebody who, if I was interviewed for an oral history, would be, very quick to share either. For, I guess from the interviewer perspective, and Lasaunia, this might be something that you can speak to. When any of your narrators did have that sort of reluctance or hesitation, was there any kind of particular technique or any line of questioning that you would use to try to draw them out and get them to share more of their story?
So for Janet, we were the actual very first interview, and we both were nervous. We both were trying to figure it out, but we got our rhythm. And I think the moment we started just having a conversation and not really thinking about the recorder, it made it more comfortable. So we wouldn't have to, it was just like just having a regular conversation. Once we got the rhythm, once we got the rules out, once we got the noise, background, we got the noise out of the way and we figured out how to do that. It just became a comfortable conversation, even with all the other interviews that I did. It was just like, because at first I wasn't sure, like, do I talk with them? Do I not talk with them? But as we got all the rules down to a science, it was just a comfortable conversation.
Great. And I guess, kind of, keeping on track here, like thinking a little bit more about the interview experience, I wanted to ask, and maybe you can answer this, Bintou. I know that it's really difficult for people to pack a lifetime of their stories and their remembrances into, something as brief as an hour, hour and a half, 2-hour long interview. So did you rely on the questions you prepared to ask, or did you find yourself kind of getting into the flow of the stories and redirecting and, thinking about new ways to take the interview? Was I guess, was it more of like a prepared experience, or was it kind of like whatever was coming out in the moment?
Well, as you alluded to, people are sharing their lives, and your life doesn't come out scripted. So when people are sharing, we try to give them the opportunity and the space to be able to do so. We did prepare a line of questions so that we can make sure that we were getting people to open up and bring forth certain memories that they had. But as they continue to share, we dug into some of those things that they shared about, because we really wanted to find out what were the stories of the people, not just the answers to our questions.
Perfect, thank you. So let me go back to you, Akua. You have had the experience of being both a project director and a narrator as well. I was wondering if you could kind of compare those two experiences and tell us a little bit about what it's like to be on kind of both sides of an oral history project.
That's a great question to ask because it is very different. It was for me. I'm a manager type person. I'm an organizer. I like order. I like to put everything out and make opportunities available for other people to do things. And so, you know, I'm looking at that detail and all of the things that are required for that. And so that's the administrator side of me, making sure that as a team, we had a chance to talk, we had a chance to learn, we participated in all of the trainings, we asked questions, we literally met weekly for about 3 months straight before we even did anything, because it was just a matter of making sure we can be as organized as possible. When it came to being a narrator, one of the people who was being interviewed, I realized, and I think Janet probably experienced this as well, of the questions brought back memories that I hadn't thought about before, that I hadn't thought about in a very, very long time. One example, I was talking and Bintou happened to interview me. Mm-hmm. And I said something and I said, yeah, and my grandmother, she lived with us for a while. And she said, oh, stop. She said, stop. What do you mean your grandmother lived with you? I said, yes, she lived in our house. She moved from South Carolina to Washington, D.C. and lived with us. And I was only a baby. She, as a matter of fact, she transitioned in Washington, D.C. So technically, if I counted that generation, I would be maybe the third generation or fourth generation. I can't remember it right now, but that was just one of those moments that I literally had forgotten. And my daughter had no clue that her great grandmother had lived in the same house that we lived in. So that was one of those moments, as I said, where this process of being a narrator allowed me to kind of reflect on things that I hadn't thought about in a very, very long time. And I think that that's the beauty of having the oral tradition and the oral histories. I'm one who believes that the narrators themselves are the oral historians. They are the historians. And as interviewers and the people who are doing the administration, we have a role in how we help to support and collect that information. But the truth of the matter is, it's the people who are giving us the history. Those are the historians. And so that was a moment in time where I said, okay, this is really important to do.
Excellent. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's, you know, all definitely right. And I mean, it's, you know, amazing kind of, you know, what you can kind of pull out that, you know, you had never thought about in many, many years until you like actually sit down, and especially, you know, as you sit down and start to talk with others who have had like similar shared experiences, like it really like kind of brings home the idea that, you know, in a lot of ways, memory is collective and it's, you know, kind of a shared network of experience, you know, in some ways more than it is just, you know, things that are buried in our individual minds. Yeah, thank you for that. And I'd like to actually, you know, ask, you know, definitely another question about process here. And this might be, you know, something for Lasaunia or Bintou or both of you. I know, you know, it often happens when you're doing an interview, you know, you like get to what you feel is the end, you thank the narrator, you turn off the recorder, and then like immediately or the next day you think like, I should have asked this question, or I should have asked that question, or I should have taken it this way or that way. And I'm wondering if either of you had that experience throughout the project, and if you could kind of share that with us if you did.
So I did have that experience. And like I said before, Janet and I was the very first interview. So once I heard it, I played it back and I was thinking, I probably could have engaged her a little more, or I allow her to speak. I allow her to be as comfortable as possible. But then sometimes it was feeling rushed. So with my next interview, I took my time and I allowed the interviewee to take her time, and the narrator to take her time as well. So that way we won't feel like we're in a place where I'm not really hearing her, like Bintou said before, we're just getting answers, but she's allowing to experience the moment she had back when she lived on the block. And in fact, one of my interviews, she said to me, I still live on this block and I still experience life differently, even though I've left and come back. And so that allowed her to open up more conversation. And even though we had prompted questions, it just gave us a different kind of perspective. I was definitely able to gain, because as I'm listening to them, I'm gaining knowledge. So it's like, hey, that's interesting. I didn't know that. And still having to make sure that I'm staying on topic and allowing them to be able to express themselves how they felt that was going to contribute to our project.
So for me, it really brought through the note that if you're going to sit to have the histories, you actually have to sit to have the history.
Yes.
You have to take your time. And this is something that's been reiterated from birth through coming up through my culture and my upbringing with my parents and those people who they've put me in place with through trainings and through this project training and just the continued experience that in order to be a historian, you have to wait for the people to give you the history. You can't do it. You have to be present. And as you can see with my mom, her interview that I might have done with somebody else for 45 minutes, we did 2.5 hours. So in 2-3 parts. So taking the time to do that. My highlight for what you were asking came in the pre-interviews. I wish I had my recorder going as I was calling people. I'm walking through the store. Let me make sure I'm getting ready for the interview. I'm going to call this person down so I don't forget. And I call, and we've been on the phone for 40 minutes.
Yes.
And this is the call. Hey, let's find a date to set up our interview. A 3-minute call is 40 minutes. The people who have honored us with sharing started with such full hearts. Their stories, giving up their time, being so acquiescent to scheduling and sitting down with us. And if we're going to do it, we tried to do it as right as we could. So again, thank you to all those who contributed, and from the training to the narrators to the team.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, that's definitely like something that I've definitely heard before is that, when people, do those pre-interview calls and they reach out to people to establish rapport, like sometimes that's the side of things where, you start to get stories and you're like, oh, well, I wish the recorder was on right now, I definitely think that that's a sign that, that there is a lot of, interest in sharing these stories, a lot of trust among the community in sharing these stories. So, I mean, all of that, I think, probably has contributed to, this project being the success that it has been. So thank you for that. And actually, I have another question here to get from the narrator's perspective. And I'm wondering, Janet, if you could answer this one. Now that you have, shared your story, now that you've, given it to all of us, contributed to the DC Public Library, what are your hopes for that story? What do you hope comes of that?
I think my main hope is that others in the neighborhood share their stories. Because living in the inner city, sometimes we think that it's all bad, and it's not. I went to all public schools, Maury, Elliott, Easton, UDC, and I think I turned out okay. They get bad reputation a lot of times that the inner city schools aren't good, but I think the teachers back then, I mean, they encouraged us to do what we wanted to do. I remember being in 7th grade and my homeroom teacher, Miss Mike Sale, say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, a photographer. And she said, oh, I know photography and I'll teach you after school. She was willing to stay after school, take up her time to teach me this skill and this trade that I went on to use through life for 42 years in the government. Being a photographer first, a videographer next, and then a producer. So back then, those teachers were very caring, and they just believed in you, and they didn't try to stray you from what you wanted to do just because you live where you live. And I mean, even my parents, when I told them what I wanted to be, they was like, "There's no Black children in that. There's no women in that." I said, "Well, I don't want to be a typist. I don't want to type." And that's what everybody used to be, a secretary when I was coming up. And that wasn't a thing for me. So they bought the camera. They let me paint the windows in the basement and make my dark room. Sometimes I did it before they knew about it, but once he found out, my father found out, it was okay. He let me continue having a dark room in the basement. But if others could tell their stories in the neighborhood throughout the city, I think that would be a great added, you know, a big contribution to the inner city living that folks don't hear on a regular. They're very successful stories in the neighborhood.
Thanks so much, Janet. And as so often happens here, I think when we get into conversations like this, I've, so enjoyed listening to the responses to these questions and everything. I want to make sure that I see that our, time for the moderated discussion portion of this is like quickly coming to an end. Things kind of go by a little bit quicker than I expect sometimes once we really get into it. And I actually really wanted to, turn to some questions about, some of the kind of historical context of the, stories that you all collected through this project. We've talked a lot about the oral history process and how that went for you. But I'd actually like to turn to a question now that I think, you kind of touched on a little bit, especially with that first clip that with Vita Cook that, kind of talked a little bit about, challenging historical narratives and prevailing perspectives. But the question is basically that, oral history preserves the memories of individual narrators, but it can also confirm, refute, color, and or enhance these historic or prevailing historical narratives. So, we've touched on this one, but I'm wondering, if there are any other kind of broader historical themes that the interviews spoke to, or if there were any other kind of similar, challenges to historical narratives, additions to the, historical record that kind of came out of the interviews that you all did.
Yeah, so I'll answer that, Jasper. There were several themes that came out, and one in particular that came out through a few narrators had to do with Lincoln Park, which is right at the corner of our block, the various things that are happening right now, currently with movements, the Black Lives Matter movement, with other happenings in our community, and things that happened in the past as well. And so I thought I would share, this would be a great time to share cue up number 2, my second cue. And this is with Miss Wendy Pinckney Pierce. And she too is an educator who had been staying in Washington, D.C. all of her life and has connected with many people over her career. But she started to talk a little bit about some of the other types of happenings that we all experience. So if you can share that one, that would be great.
Great.
Were there any customs or observances that you noticed that people came together on the block to participate in?
Oh, geez. We celebrated a lot. Pretty much everything we celebrated. I remember Sam's mom, she could, Samuel Johnson, Shauna's mother, she could crochet really, really well. And I remember she crocheted I can't think of the name of them. give me a minute. She had crocheted. It was a wrap, but it's not a wrap. Shawls. No, not quite. Not shawls. It was, you pull them over your head, but she made them for several of us, and they were red, black, and green. And we participated in the march for Dr. King's birthday to become a holiday. We participated in a couple of marches. We came together, or we were there when for the dedication of the Mary McLeod Bethune statue. That was when Cicely Tyson, I think Harry Belafonte too. They came to Lincoln Park, and we got to see them.
Thank you for sharing that one. And that just, again, that reverberated over and over, because there was activism in our community. This was not an individual thing. This was a community activism that, you know, we're very proud of. If there was some, we didn't use the word social justice or social injustice at that time, but that's what we were talking about. If there were social injustices, we as a community gathered, and our families they supported us. You know, our families supported our being able to be a part of those things. Our families, when there were the riots in the 60s and the disturbances that happened, and the city was in flame, our entire community came out and literally with hoses and water and put fires out throughout our alleyways, and then we came out together as a community and we cleaned our community, you know, and this was not unusual for us to do celebrations as well as challenges, or well as protests, or anything that we thought really was important or valuable. And the important part about that is that our families, this was a family affair. This was not only the teenagers or only this one or that one. And so we hear about that and we see about that. When we saw what was happening now, some of the narrators started to talk about that and how important they thought that kind of community activism was and is still to this day.
Can I add also that I think most of the narrators also concluded with their own realizations that these stories don't need to be lost in the wind. After them going through their process of sharing it, just really letting us know that they do want people to know these stories. They don't want them to go and then the next generation not have them, and then their history and their parents' history is erased within this legacy of Washington, D.C.
I think that's a good segue into another question I have that kind of goes back, I guess, a little bit to the oral history process. One of the ways, obviously, that these oral histories are going to be preserved and shared back is through the DC Archive at the DC Public Library. But I was also wondering if, and maybe you've already done some of this already, if there are any plans amongst your project team to kind of share those stories back with the community so that, they can be kind of, even in the moment, passed down to other generations and people who weren't necessarily part of the project, directly.
So we have a couple of things in mind. And of course, it's going to take time, and we're still continuing, as I said, to collect interviews. But for example, many of the narrators that we spoke to all have relationships with the public schools in the area, Maury Elementary, Eastern High School. And we would love to be able to somehow share that with those schools as a part of their education about their communities. We also have many of us who are involved in the arts itself as well as the humanities. And one of my hopes, and I've said this to the team, is that perhaps we can connect with maybe a DC high school or in a theater group, and as a part of their DC history, somehow do some narratives from these and actually perform the narratives and get a chance to read them along with their studies and give that type of presentation. The third thing that we are probably going to do first is try to connect with the church on the corner, Brown Memorial AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, which there are many members of the community who were members, but then there were many community people who were not members, but still had a great interaction because it was truly a community church. Both Janet is still a member, as well as my sister, and I believe the church is 138 years old, Genesis.
Yes. Getting ready to celebrate our anniversary in June.
Yes. Wow. And so this is, important history to understand how the African American church has played a pivotal role in communities, whether you were members or not. They were truly community churches. And so there are a number of things that we hope to do. And one, of course, and I missed this one, we did a group interview with several of the narrators, which was really wonderful. And they are saying, we got to get together.
Yes.
We have to have a gathering. And so we're hoping that when the pandemic is fully, in a place where we can come together again and we're all safe, that perhaps we can partner with Brown AME as one of the places that we can bring the community together, both new members of the community. We have some who've just come in the last 20 years, the last 10 years, the last 5 years, but so that they have a true understanding of the community that they've come into. Because I think one of the things that we see across Washington, DC, and obviously we're representing one aspect of Washington, DC, but there are multiple across Washington, DC. And that is that we are communities of people who have a long history in this place. And as we have new members come into the community, we're open about people coming. That's not an issue at all. But it's also about acknowledging who is already there and learning about the people who are part of the city, learning about the history of the city. One of the things that I'm reminded of almost immediately is not too long ago, maybe about a year now, when there was this challenge with one particular storefront who was playing music outside of the storefront that happened to be go-go music. And some new community members were trying to stop it. And I believe there's some legislation that was trying to go forward to the city council to have some, and it's still there, trying to put some regulations on how the music could be played. What was so beautiful in that moment, and again, I was at work the day it happened, but the community came out and there became immediate huge block party featuring go-go music.
Go-go is alive and well right now because go-go is the sound of DC. And to try and mute something that was there, and the people who are there as you come into a community, it's like you walking in somebody's house and telling them where they should put their shoes and where they should put their coat. You're coming into the space now, not to say that you don't have your space too, but open your eyes, open your ears as you walk in.
So those are things that are important to us. Those are the dreams, those are the hopes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think that there are a lot of great ideas there. And I think that, oral history really can have this, ability to, bring, newcomers to the neighborhoods, to the cities in, and give them the opportunity to, as you say, learn more about, kind of where they're coming into and the cultures and the community that was there before. So I definitely think that, bring everybody together for a community gathering is a really great idea. And I'm really intrigued by the idea of bringing people in to, help young people perform, or to, perform is the only word for, some of these oral histories, as part of their schoolwork as well. And actually, there have been, and you all might have heard about some of these, there have been like some successful projects where, people who do theater work have translated oral histories into some really interesting performances, including a previous DC Oral History Collaborative grantee, John Johnson, who worked on the Anacostia Unmapped 2.0 project. And he does playback theater. He actually taught a workshop a few years back on translating oral histories into performance pieces. So yeah, I think that could be a really great idea for sharing things back with the community.
Yeah, John is an excellent artist,
Definitely, yeah. If anybody hasn't seen playback theater yet, highly recommend it. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for audience questions. Just judging by the chat and what's in the Q&A right now, it seems like there's going to be a lot. But Akua, I also wanted to give you a chance to set up your third and final clip so that we can play that one as well, if that's all right.
Actually, let's go to the Q&A, and I'd like to close with that one.
Perfect. Okay.
It speaks to how we all feel.
Excellent. All right, that's what we'll do. So we will turn then to audience questions, and Tracy will be helping us, out in terms of monitoring the Q&A and helping to spotlight people who want to ask their questions aloud. You'll notice that down at the bottom, kind of on the same level there as the Q&A in the chat, you'll have the ability to kind of virtually raise your hand. So, you're welcome to put questions in the Q&A, but if you would like to speak your question aloud, just use that raise hand feature, and we'll try to get to you on kind of a first come, first serve basis. We have a limited amount of time, but we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So please feel free to ask questions of our panelists about their project and their process. And if you'd like more information about the DC Oral History Collaborative, we can answer those questions too. So with that, we'll open it up.
So the first question that came in was from Gwen Faulkner, and she wrote, as a result of the interviews, has there been a renewed or new interest of the participants to document the events of their personal lives, their neighborhood, or the city?
Hello, Gwen. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, as a matter of fact, when we started out, we thought we were going to do both video and audio, and the pandemic hit. And so we had to really kind of negotiate that. And so again, with some of the future projects, we hope to have some other levels of sharing this information through events, even possibly because Janet is a photographer, taking advantage of her skills and some of her historical documents in her photography and collecting others for an exhibit as well. So more to come on that in the future.
And yes, people have been interested in contributing. And like we said, others who have heard about the project said, well, you need to go talk to this person. You need to talk to this person. And if you've been watching the chat, there are people who've been contributing saying, look, I want you to come talk to me because my family has something to share as well.
I think I also, with our second part of our project, Thanks for Humanities DC, we'll be able to also display that with the second portion, getting added on interviews from people who will give us more knowledge and information about their neighborhoods as well as ours.
The second question is from John Nelson, and he asked, how did you keep everyone on the same page throughout the whole project?
I think that we took time before we began the interview to script out some of the questions as Jasper asked about earlier, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't waver too much from really trying to get people to pull out stories about their lives and also to recount their history or their memory of this particular event, which was our weaving thread, So just taking the time to develop the questions and really being clear about the intent, which was to have people share about living on and on the block. Just be clear, because when you talk, you can go everywhere. But you have your time to come out on your tangent, but just come back to your intent.
And a question from Eleanor Quarles was, how can you use your platform as a springboard to bridge the generational and community gaps in Washington, D.C. and surrounding areas?
So obviously for generational, ours is intergenerational. So that's not a gap for us in this particular community of people who we connected with. Having said that, I think some of the projects that we suggested, working with the public schools, getting the arts involved, having those students to study and interact with people will help to that. And I just want to make sure that I saw a hand raised from Sam Johnson. I'm hoping it's the same Sam Johnson, a former community. So if he's there and he still wants to say something, I hope he can get a chance to speak as well.
And I'm going to answer contrary to my mother. I think that though we have connections, even in our own family, with multiple generations, without the stories being there, we don't know. So the assumption of osmosis of history is that we have to be very careful of. We have a great asset in this generation who is very apt at technology use, and to be able to find ways to take the stories from sitting with our elders and having their stories and having them animate and interchange with those through these various platforms. So say my niece will be working on this.
Yeah. See, we have to listen to our young. We have to listen to our young, because obviously what she's saying is so on point, and I give space for understanding that I'm just as much a student to them as they are to me.
So Samuel Johnson, I gave you the ability to unmute your microphone, so if you could ask your question.
Well, I'm here. Hey.
Hey, Sam.
How you doing? I just wanted to make a couple of points. Tell Wendy that was a poncho my mother did.
Yes. Red, black, and
by
green.
the way, the thing with Vita said, by definition, we moved on the block 1 month after Ashe Kennedy did. That was September 67. We moved off of Spring Road. We had just gotten into DC from Georgia at the time when our father brought us there. But the thing about this being a ghetto, I mean, you like in the 1300 block of North Carolina Avenue at A Street, we had a big block club thing going on there. We used to sell katydids to raise money and canned hams and all those kind of things to raise money. But no, not so at all. By definition, not a ghetto in the sense of the way the Life magazine person was doing it. It's 1 block from Lincoln Park. It's technically Capitol Hill. Timothy, we had a Polish family living right 2 blocks down from me. We had white people up and down the block. So I don't know, when you start listening to these things and you go back to listen to how the language has changed, even when you're talking about the whole go-go thing, how the language has changed, has not changed so much as now as it was then, when we talk about gentrification and those types of things there. Because I haven't lived in the States for about 14 years now, but this is very good to see this project going, and I hope it continues to go. And I hope you get more and more people to talk about it. And I think that the community that is now North Carolina A Street, I looked at Murray Elementary School, I didn't recognize it. But I hope the people who now live in the community of all nationalities or races or whoever there get a chance to look at this, and it'd be good to speak to some of those folks too, to talk about that whole North Carolina Avenue thing. And I don't think when we talk about North Carolina Avenue, we got to remember that it was a whole community of blocks all the way down from Elliott to Eastern, because we knew everybody in the whole neighborhood, even on the other blocks and around the corner and up the alley and down the streets. So I think that's very important too. All right, good seeing you all. Okay.
Good seeing you, Sam. Yes.
So much. And he is so right. I absolutely. About the fact that you have to put a frame on when you're doing a project, but literally the connection is well beyond that
Yes.
radius. You know, we talked about Eastern Market, about Friendship House, about Elliott, about
Yes.
East, about Warren Street,
Right.
Constitution Avenue. When we were doing our indexing, it was like, man, we're connected all through this area. And then, of course, even going outside of the block, the activities that we did across the city.
Yes.
Mhm.
Amazing.
Yes.
And so again, concept of what community needs in Washington, D.C. I think there's a lot of learning there. And there's a lot of information to be shared. So, and Sam, we will be calling you because we intend to have you as a part of one of the narrators as well. So just want to let you know.
All right. No problem. I'll be glad to give my whole definition, my whole history about how I love that blog, and your mama for starting that Akua.
The block club, yes, the block club.
And making us become an organized unit as we were, to be able to participate in things socially and politically, and to actually help change a lot of things, not just for DC, but the entire country as well.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes,
Thank
yes.
Sam.
And how we used to clean up the block. Look, how we used to have to clean the alley back there.
Yeah.
For sodas and chips, we would clean the whole alley in the back.
We'll take another question if there's others, Tracy.
Sure. So Maya Ajanku, and I'm sorry for butchering your name, she asked, can the oral history technique be used as a tool for community, cultural, and emancipatory healing and empowerment, especially for groups who have been marginalized, silenced, or left out? The second part of that is, how and in what ways can we share this tool or technique and teaching larger numbers of local residents how to utilize it for growth and healing?
So I'm gonna take a little bit of this, and I want both Lasaunia and possibly Jasper or Bintou as well, Janet, all to think about this. I think that the process of telling story is a healing process, and sometimes, but I also think that it is important to have people in who can help to facilitate the healing process. Lasaunia just became a coach, and she can talk a little bit about that. I think that we are at a time and place where as a community, we are far more open than we've ever been, and we still have a long way to go into really seeking out ways to do self-healing. And I believe that the oral history of telling the story is critical in that, because oftentimes we are not heard. And I think that if the opportunity for sharing these histories and allowing people to be heard and listening and sharing and being able to have facilitators who can help navigate. And it can't be just anybody. I got to be clear about this, because you have to be, the facilitators of such sharing moments have to be knowledgeable enough about the community that they're interacting with. I don't want to have to be in a sharing moment and I have to explain to you where I'm coming from a cultural perspective. I don't expect that you're going to be able to help me completely. So I'm just saying, this is how I think about it. But Lasaunia, do you have any other thoughts about that?
I totally agree. It's imperative that you listen and you create a safe space for listening, because sometimes people want to heal, people want to be heard, people want to express how they feel, but not necessarily feeling like there's a safe space to do so. And wanting to also make sure that the person who they're expressing to is, like you said, knowledgeable enough to be able to give them that platform. Unfortunately, we living in a place now where, we just talked about this yesterday, where sometimes we show up invisible and we show up in a place where we aren't really being heard for this particular season or this particular topic. So if we take this project and others want to come on board and others want to express how they need to, you have to make sure that you're creating that space for them to be able to do so in a way where you're listening and you're not just projecting your own thing onto what's happening. You have to have a healthy balance there, because otherwise you're not going to get the full spectrum of what's happening.
And I would just say, this might not be the exact interpretation of what you're asking, but, there are, resources from the DC Oral History Collaborative and, other outside resources connected to the Oral History Association. There's, some great, really technical resources that are offered by the Vermont Folklife Center that are freely available online to anyone who's interested in using oral history as a tool for this kind of work, who's interested in starting projects. And I would definitely suggest that you continue to stay in contact with the DC Oral History Collaborative as we offer our shorter webinars, our longer 3-session training, and we're actually trying to create a new program that will allow us to have, people who are experienced doing oral histories, especially people who are experienced doing oral histories in Washington, DC, actually, help us reach out to other communities who are interested in starting this kind of work and giving them a sense of what goes into it, how to build their projects, and really, help more people have access to oral history as a tool for, research, documenting, preserving history, and also growth and healing, which is an important part of it. So thank you.
I'm going to quickly answer 2 questions that I see in the chat. Karen has asked, I have a map of North Carolina Avenue. Where was the tennis court? The tennis court was set up literally in the middle of the street.
Yes.
The blocks were literally closed off at the end on 13th Street, at the end on 14th Street, and the entire middle of the street became the tennis court. So again, we said, the people changed their clothes in our houses. They set up their electricity by connecting to our houses. I remember by accident, I actually switched the switch, changed the switch, and the electricity went off about 5 seconds, and I cut it right back. But that was by accident. The second question, so that's the answer to your question, Karen. Eleanor asked, I have a 2nd-generation friend who went to Morehouse College, and we still live on North Carolina. He still lives on North Carolina Avenue. How can I get him involved? I would say you can connect through Jasper to get my email address. I can actually put my email address in the chat, and we can talk and see if he has an interest. Again, it's a situation where we're still collecting, and if he has an interest to be a part, we can hopefully help him. But in the meantime, we can introduce him to us in the community. And the block, I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, the block party? I'm sorry, she's telling me something she's asking me, and I don't understand what she's asking me.
Okay, we can continue to the next question.
Sure. So Paula asked, how do you draw out a shy interviewee?
Ooh, I like this one. First, make sure that you've created the space for the interview, whether you're in their house, if you guys are in another space, if you make sure it's a space where it's quiet enough that you can really hear and listen to that person. That the pre-interview is important for this as well. So you can gather whatever information, set up the space, set up the time that's comfortable with them, start to hear their tone to see kind of how expressive they are. And you always start with asking, who are you, or where do you come from? If you have a line of questions that might be like icebreakers that might help. It just really depends on the intent of your interview. But if you don't ask questions that are too large, if it's too much to handle, start with one directed question every time that you ask. And this is something I'm still working on myself. But if it seems like it's too big, break that question down again. Even if it's a single question, break it down, break it down. Think of those things that they connect with. Does that have a memory that connects to touch, to taste, to smell, to sound? So that if you need to access those senses, that might get them to relate to the memory that you want them to bring forward. And also be careful, because memories are powerful things. They can stir up things inside of people. So sometimes the shyness might be their personality, and sometimes it's because of what the memory holds to them. So give them space and permission, and some people will not answer, and that's okay too.
I was one of those shy interviewers. Believe it or not. My friends wouldn't believe it.
The one good thing I will also say, because Bintou was already working on oral history projects, so she brought a lot to that. She made it more easy for us to kind of facilitate through. She gave us prompts and she gave us ways, even as an interviewer for the narrator, to look signs to look out for. And so again, with Janet and I, we both were trying to figure it out. But I found out moving forward, just listening to Bintou's prompts made it a little easier.
Yeah, in addition to the training with DC Humanities and Oral History DC Oral History Collaboration, I had the honor of coming out of COP and working into a fellowship with Greater Baltimore Cultural Alliance and the Urban Arts Leadership. It's a program under Greater Baltimore Cultural Alliance, and that was headed by Kadibi Ajanku. And in this, we got to pair up with so many resources that allowed us to work through the interviewing process and oral history taking process. And it was phenomenal. And I'm so sorry right now, this name is jumping out of my head, but I will call your name as soon as it comes back into my head. She was just another phenomenal resource through that. And the training was great. And it also allowed me to come to tap into those resources that my mother and my father established in our community within the arts, being that I myself am a Jolly and come from a lineage of oral historians, in addition to coming from a dance and music community where in order to go through a real learning process, you have to sit and let your teacher teach you. Like you can't rush them. And some things you have to repeat over and over and over and over. And being able to access that type of patience and those skills of listening inside of this forum were really important. So thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Dad. Too.
Thanks, Dad.
So for the sake of time, I think I'll play that video clip because we will cut off promptly at 12:30.
So let me just set it up for everyone. So this last clip is from Reverend Dr. William Jordan III. He was probably his family, and says that they were one of the first African-American families to move on to our block. And this is back in the 40s. So I think that what he expresses says a lot to how we as a community, particularly the children, felt and how we were raised and supported by our community, our parents, our teachers, our children. So we'll listen to this clip.
Of all the things you experienced and learned, growing up in the neighborhood, what do you feel is the most memorable or most valuable?
Freedom. Just the absolute freedom of going out your house, going somewhere, not having any fear whatsoever. Not wondering about anybody else other than the direction in which you're going and the good times that you're going to have. You know, that's all. None of this other stuff that's out here today. None of it. We just, it's just, it was just one of those things, you know, you walked everywhere, you rode your bicycle, or, you know, you got up a little age, they get your driver's license, you know, dad wasn't going anywhere, mom wasn't going anywhere, so, you know, you could go ahead and get it and ride. You had to come back at a certain time. There are always limitations, but you never looked at it like that. That was just the thrill of being able to go and spend that time and know what time you got to get back. But those are memorable times. Those were the joys of having that freedom.
And with that, I just want to share and say thank you to everyone. Our email address, theblockproject2020@gmail.com. Again, theblockproject2020@gmail.com. Thank you so much, Jasper, Tracy.
Thank you, Jasper and Tracy.
And I can't remember the name of the other.
Kelly
and
Rhonda.
everyone else who
you.
listen. This has been amazing to share, and we look forward to share with everyone. Please continue to connect with us through the blockproject2020@gmail.com.
And I just want to say thank you to all of you on the panel. It's been, I can't say enough how much of a, honor and experience and a, learning opportunity it's been to kind of work with you all on this kind of over the last few months, to, work with you, throughout your project period and to be on this panel. It's been great. And I really appreciate all of you joining us. And thank you to everyone who joined us, for this little bit of their Saturday morning as well. And thanks for all the great questions. And, I echo the thanks to Tracy and our excellent ASL interpreters as well for keeping the program running smoothly. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Right.
Yes.